Hi, my name's Pat Lorton. I've been working to accelerate drug discovery and materials design at Schrödinger for the last 14 years. For 12 of those years, we've actually been major Qt users. It's a toolkit I've used a lot myself. I'm very passionate about how it works, and I'd love to talk to people about our use cases today. Many of you have probably never heard of Schrödinger or even computational chemistry. It's a field that is quite old, actually, probably close to 100 years if you include formulas and things like that. But it's taken off in the last 15, 10, 5 years in a bit of a renaissance period with the great acceleration of compute. It has applications for many, many things that trouble mankind, from curing diseases to inventing better batteries to better OLEDs for your telephone. These are all things computational chemistry can help us to address. That's actually what brought in the interest of one of our biggest investors, Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation. They believe that through Schrödinger we'll be able to push mankind forward, and Schrödinger believes that through Qt we'll accomplish that together. So getting a bit more into the nuts and bolts of what computational chemistry is, the field is really trying to predict chemical properties on a computer so that you don't have to run lab experiments. Lab experiments are sometimes really cheap and easy, but often they're extremely expensive. You can imagine spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a single data point. So if you can simulate that on a computer, the amount of money and time savings can actually be immense to push things forward. This is especially relevant in drug discovery. The problems can be very, very difficult. They're involving sometimes subatomic interactions all the way up to giant proteins. So it's really mathematically complex. And in being able to solve these problems in computational chemistry, we're really thinking about how to push mankind forward. The Schrödinger formula to all of this is twofold. We have both a major emphasis on science and a major emphasis on technology. Schrödinger has existed for 30 years, and for a lot of that we were a much smaller company, and we've started to grow as the field has really started to grow. We were founded by academics. You can see our original logo on the top right of the slide. There's a bit of a science joke there. Our first product was called Jaguar, Schrödinger's fast cat. It was quantum mechanics software. Over that period, we've expanded from just quantum mechanics software all the way up through molecular mechanics and all these higher order theories. We have 150 PhD scientists who are contributing to all of this currently. And on top of that, we're also really investing in technology, not just the science, not just the publications. We have 150 developers who have pretty large overlap with the PhDs, but many of them are non-PhD developers who are working more on the infrastructure science side. Our Qt users are both. We have scientists who use a lot of Qt, PySide, and we have full-time developers that use a lot of it. From a technology stack perspective, we utilize HPC very, very heavily. Hundreds of thousands of CPUs, tens of thousands of GPUs at a time to run these massive calculations. But we also need a really polished embedded platform, from the desktop experience, which is really rich with Qt driving a really unique interface, all the way through a web app and HPC, both in the cloud and internal. But one thing that's really key across all of that is usability, because if the scientists can't use the software, it's not really of any use. They're not producing anything valuable if they can't figure out how to run calculations at a massive scale and analyze the data. I'm going to mostly be talking about Maestro today. We have two products that are really big Qt users. Maestro is the one that drives a lot of our interactions, a lot of our computational engines. I'll also mention PyMol, which is an open source product we have that's beautiful visualizations, movie making, and things like that. Maestro's the 3D visualization both before and after you run calculations, even between many calculations when you're running a pipeline of them. It has the ability to interface with all of these with many, many panels, many computation engines. It lets you visualize your results, analyze your results, and things like that. PyMol creates beautiful graphics, beautiful movies. It has OpenGL and ray tracing, so you can take it to that next step in terms of quality of visualization. It has, on top of the powerful movie creation, it also is an open source product. We have an incentive version with additional features, but primarily this is something many people use in the open source world as well. So starting with PyMol there, this is an example of a PyMol interface that's using Qt. You can see we're really utilizing OpenGL a lot for a lot of the graphics still in terms of the interaction menus. This is because it has to run both on the web and in AxPyMol, or I'm sorry, we have a product called AxPyMol that runs on ActiveX. So we keep a lot of stuff in OpenGL just for total complete portability, but we do have the desktop version, which uses PyQt heavily. It has PyQt and PySide. It has a lot of menus. It has rich user interfaces and things like that. Maestro, on the other hand, really flexes Qt and PyQt. It is a massive product that uses them at every level, hundreds of thousands of lines of code to get everything we can out of it. I'm showing this specific screenshot because it's extremely crowded and it shows you how much we have. It kind of makes Adobe Photoshop seem simple with how many options we have. There is a bit of a learning curve, but we do our best with usability and UX to make it easy to get started in. The top, you can see an atom selection bar. This allows you to control what you're seeing in that OpenGL workspace there. On the medium left, we have kind of a database of the structures, so you can visualize many chemical structures at once. You can see we've included a bunch there. Those are visualized in the workspace right now. And the bottom left allows you to see inside each one of those individual molecules, what are you looking at, what do I want to visualize? It allows you to do a style toolbar and things like that. So this is a really rich, hard to see version to get all the features out of it, but I figured I'd start with everything we're utilizing Qt for. This is a much less crowded one. This is kind of what Maestro looks like when you start it and you just import one picture. For the novice Photoshop users like myself, this is what happens when you just import one JPEG and start polishing things away. But this is how Maestro looks with just an empty slate to start developing with. At the bottom left, you still see there's the ability to customize visualization, things like that, but it's just much easier to see. We use a QGraphics view heavily. In the bottom left of the workspace, you can see there's actually a 2D molecule rendering. It's nice that it's so easy to embed things on top of the 3D rendering. On the top center of that workspace, you can see that we have embedded widgets, which allow us to interact with the 3D really natively and really easily. Doing this in a cross-platform way would be extremely difficult, knowing the different toolkits and things like that, but Qt makes it all really easy for us. So talking about how exactly Qt benefits Maestro, it can't be understated how important the cross-platform nature of it is. About 70% of our users are on Linux, about 20% are on Windows, and then we have 10% on Mac. And we have to keep all of those users happy. We don't have the option to cut any of them out. And it's also critical that they all have the exact same experience. Some people have multiple machines, so they need the same experience on the Mac that they have on Windows that they have on Linux. And we're able to deliver that with Qt because it's such a powerful platform. The terrific API design of Qt can't be understated either. It's extremely extensible. It allows us to build exactly what we need to get the job done, and it doesn't limit us even though we're going across platforms. It's extremely customizable in terms of styles, which are mostly cross-platform. It's about as good as you can do. Obviously, there's going to be the occasional customization you have to do for a specific platform, but really we're able to get it looking pretty much the same across all three platforms with relatively little work. The signals and slots, I think, are really, really key. And speaking today, for the younger generation, it probably doesn't seem as revolutionary as it was. But when Qt first put signals and slots in, that was a totally different way in C++ to have UI interactions, even non-UI interactions. And the cross-platform availability of those at such an early age allowed us to build a really powerful platform. These things have been built a bit more into languages recently, but nonetheless, it's still really critical that those were available so early so we could build something so rich. There's a large ecosystem around Qt. That's really important for us. There's plenty of packages we tie into. I'll show a couple of those later. But that makes it much, much easier to expand. And it also makes you more comfortable using a toolkit because it means there's so many people that have bought in that it's not going to diminish or go down one day. PyQt and PySide, we write a lot of Python code. Maybe not more Python code than C++ code, but a lot of Python code. From the UI perspective, the majority of our UIs are actually in Python code. And Python is ultimately the language of scientists. Most scientists these days come out of their PhDs having learned Python, being trained and relatively fluent in Python. But that ability for them to take a language they already know and interact with Qt really easily is a big selling point. In recent years, Qt's added Qt charts, which is really a breath of fresh air. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we were very excited for Qt charts because it gives us that type of signal slot interactivity, high performance that we are used to getting from Qt. The cross-platform serialization, binary serialization that works really, really well, easy to support, easy to do compression. All of these things are great because we don't have to have large sections of our code base dealing with these things with if-def statements across the platform, so it's wonderful. And then multi-threading and multi-processing. Again, this has gotten a little bit more cross-platform over the years, but there was a time when imagining doing one code base that could handle multi-processing, multi-threading fluidly, and it worked well across all three platforms. That was a dream when that was first realized. So I want to kind of step back and talk about everything I'm talking about. How does that affect us in an everyday life? So I want to talk about how we're actually applying our computational platform for COVID research. So we're part of a COVID alliance that's doing philanthropic research trying to discover a treatment for COVID, not a vaccine, but something that would actually cure it when you already have it. This is a much longer term project than the vaccine, but not everyone's going to end up taking the vaccine. It's really important in the future that we develop a treatment. We're doing this with top pharmaceutical companies like Takeda, Novartis, Gilead, WuXi, lots of help from other big companies, but we're using our platform to design novel therapeutics to try to treat COVID. The goal is a small molecule that you could take in a pill. That would be wonderful. Then people can take it home and treat themselves. This is something that a lot of research is going into, not just in this alliance, but we're very happy with how we're contributing to this alliance. There's a bunch of different approaches. We're targeting different proteins and things like that. But it would be great, it's not a requirement, but it would be great if we could create a therapeutic that was actually across multiple SARS-CoV strains. That would make it so that if this thing mutated, we'd have a therapeutic already ready that would help be able to treat it. So now I'm going to walk you through how our software can actually be used for that project. So what we're looking at here is actually the COVID spike protein. You've probably heard about this, maybe you read about it in the news. It's something that's pretty unique to COVID-19 that makes it especially problematic. So a lot of the drug solutions that people are looking at, or even the vaccine solutions, are analyzing the spike protein and trying to figure out how to target it specifically. So in this case, what we're doing is we're taking our multiple sequence viewer on the left, which is a very, very large, powerful PyQt application with some actual Qt behind it for the highest performance parts. We've been able to style it like the rest of our applications. You can see integrate it very well with the rest of our application using signals and slots. And this enables scientists to be doing analysis of the spike protein and in both 3D, visualizing it, and also looking at the sequence that the spike has. So the example that I'm trying to show here, and I'll be honest that I just randomly selected some things inside the spike protein, is that someone's looking at the textual data and they say, you know what, there's something interesting here, and they select it. It sends a signal across, the workspace gets it, and it immediately registers that I should select these things inside the workspace. They can see it in 3D too. They're then able to click on the styling tab and style it differently to really make it pop out. And now they've identified something in the protein that they might try to develop a drug against. So this example now, I've taken that and I've turned it into a surface. So what the surface does is it kind of shows you where the drug might be able to fit. So drug interactions involve a small molecule, kind of like a hand, and then fitting into a glove. But the glove is really a part of a giant protein. You can almost think of it, I like to describe it a bit like trying to fit your hand inside a glove that's floating inside a pool. So the glove can open and close with the water. It's not as simple as just pulling on a glove. You have to find the perfect compound that will fit in there and will do it as physics are taking place all around it. That's part of the simulation, actually. It's the protein moving and the glove moving and still seeing whether the ligand can fit inside there. So what this visualization is say that in the multiple sequence view that I showed you earlier, they identified a pocket that might be druggable. This is now showing you trying to render that pocket and thinking maybe we can design a compound against that. So that's kind of a starting point when you're first thinking about how to design compounds for proteins. The next thing that this is okay, I've come up with some idea that might fit in there. It's just totally starting from scratch. But let's figure out whether there's anything just purchasable, whether a chemistry company already makes a compound which I can purchase to test against this. Not in the wildest dreams, that'll never end up being the final drug, but it gives you that first data point you need. So what this is a Qt application that it sends your ideas as you draw them across the internet to a server that searches in live time 2 billion compounds that are commercially purchasable. And you might think, 2 billion, that sounds like a lot of compounds. That's actually nothing in drug-like chemical space. So the potential drug compounds that we could create is 10 to the 60th. That's a number so big that our brains really can't comprehend it. So to put it into perspective, the entire Milky Way, where our sun and all of its planets are just one infinitesimally small part of it, the entire Milky Way only has 10 to the 60th atoms. So there are as many atoms in the entire Milky Way as there are potential drug-like compounds. So the 2 billion we're looking at is still a tiny percent, but it's just a starting place, an exploratory place that we can get going. So we're drawing it in Qt, it's live updating, it's using all of those mechanics behind Qt, obviously the rendering engine, the table, all of the stuff that you're used to. It's sending it off, the server's returning responses, and it's giving us ideas of potential drug compounds. So I'll talk a little bit about the backend, because this is actually a unique backend for us in two ways. One, it's mostly open source. We again have an open source incentive, but it's also using Qt really heavily. So the backend's using Qt for data serialization, for compression, for communication between PyQt. it's many, many different ways. For Qt concurrent, multi-threading, all of these things, the backend uses it heavily. And it's really great that Qt enables us that way. Then going on to talk about the next step. So I have 350 applications to choose from in Maestro. It has far more panels than Adobe has filters in the default installation. So which computational engine did I pick? I, of course, picked the one that I worked on 10 years ago just because I'm the most comfortable with it. But in this particular one, what we're doing is we're taking a ligand, a potential drug compound, I should say, and we're saying, is there anything that is kind of shaped like this? It has the same side chains. It looks very, very similar. And if so, can I take that compound and pass it on to a synthetic chemist to make? Again, keep in mind the second we start changing things, since the space is so enormous, the odds of it ending up in those 2 billion that you can just purchase off the shelf are very, very low. So you go immediately from there to a synthetic chemist. Synthetic chemists can sometimes be very, very cheap if you're just making small changes, but often if you make any type of substantial change, it's thousands, tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars to try to make that change in the lab. So being able to design the compound and test its properties on the computer are very, very important to speed up drug discovery. That's actually what we're adding to the COVID Alliance. We're helping with design. The other companies are also partaking in design, but we're also doing initial simulation before we have to go into the lab. That way we save time and we can speed up drug discovery. So as you're running that engine, this is a backend that's actually so fast that it runs locally on the machine. It doesn't run remotely. It actually uses Qt's local server to communicate between the backend and the front end in Maestro. They're totally separate processes, so it's a good fit. It's great because it's multi-platform. When this was written 10 years ago, coming up with a multi-platform way to basically use pipes to transmit data was really, really hard. But as we're calculating live results, the user can see them, they can get feedback, they can decide if anything interesting is being generated. You can see here, this backend produces 3 different properties that they're trying to optimize for. None of these properties necessarily correlate too much with anything about creating a great drug, but they're kind of just a starting place, something to get thinking about. Once you get all of those results, we'll say tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of results, you have to do something with that data. So Qt's integration with the Jupyter Notebook is actually really, really useful for us because, again, Python is the language that scientists speak, so a lot of them already know Python really well. They can use the Jupyter Notebook, they can plot in place and things like that. They can interact with the workspace, pull data. This plot I just made here, if you actually read the code, is kind of meaningless because I'm just plotting the x coordinate of atoms, but you can imagine plotting important properties against each other and getting scientific insights out of it. At the same time, this is not particularly user-friendly, which is what I said was important to us earlier on. So the Qt charting plugin is really important for us because it enables us to make much higher quality plots. These are things that we haven't been able to do historically. We've used a lot of the Python plotting libraries, even tried some C++ ones over the years, and we've never come away too impressed. But a couple years ago, after Qt charts had come out, we actually did a hackathon with our team. We looked at we seriously looked at, I should say, a half dozen different plotting options. We put tests in them and demos, and we came out deciding Qt charts was the best there was out there. And we're really happy with that decision because the last 2 years we've integrated it with our product, and we've gotten substantially better plotting, charting, scientific interactions. And we're only going to get more. The truth is Qt regularly improves upon things. This is still very young. We're very excited for the roadmap around charts going forward. This is an example of what happens after you've had your scientific insights, your initial insights. You haven't found anything you're too confident in because you haven't run a serious hardcore calculation yet, but you've come up with what you think are really good ideas. This is our backend called FEP. This allows you to predict exactly how well a ligand will bind with a protein. So ultimately, whether the drug will actually go where you want it to go. We can test this, what we call in silico on the chip, and save very expensive synthesis and lab calculations. So say you come up with 100,000 new ideas. In the entire length of a drug discovery project, often they only create 1,000 to 10,000 things in the lab. So if you can come up with 100,000 ideas in a week, that means you're throwing out most of your ideas, often without any validation. But if you can validate them computationally, then that gives you the opportunity to describe the drugs rapidly, then figure out the best ones to synthesize those, test your theories, test how your in silico models are working, and iterate. So again, I want to talk about how this entire process is much more cyclical. It involves iteration, but I've kind of described it from end to end just to show you how Qt is being used at every step. In this particular case, we have a QGraphics view on the right. You can see that we're rendering molecules inside graph nodes. We're connecting them. Those graph nodes actually are fully interactable. You can hover over them, and it lights up the paths to the other nodes. This is all seamless and easy to write in Qt. Most graphics libraries, this would be really, really hard. Very few things are built to do this well and built in such an extensible way. And on top of that, for Qt to have all of this and have it integrated with everything else we have, it really just makes it possible for us to create these rich applications that would otherwise be impossible. So say you've come up with your great compound, it's been designed, you've gone through all these iterations, and finally you're ready to show off your drug molecule. So this is just an example of how easily Qt integrates with other libraries. This is a team looking around a holographic display. It's a really cool thing, by the way. The whole team can look and see in 3D without any glasses or anything like that. And with Qt, since it integrates so well with OpenGL and Vulkan and these things, all we had to do was render for this looking glass display, and it worked seamlessly out of box across platform. That's really nice, because if we were tied into the architecture of the individual platform, this might have been really, really painful instead of a fairly straightforward thing to do. So kind of in summary, I want to talk about how important Qt is for Schrödinger. We use it across our entire visualization. Even as I mentioned, it's in a backend or two. It's great for its cross-compatibility. It's great for its design. It's great for its extensibility. And that's why we've really invested so hard in it. We deeply integrate it. It allows us to extend our solutions to scientists using PyQt and PySide. And I think the last point that's so critical is that the less time we use fiddling with cross-platform issues, fiddling with one pixel being off, trying to retheme things and restyle things, the less time we do that, the more time we're focusing on science. And the more time we focus on science, the faster we can push these things forward. Hopefully, the faster we can discover drugs. And on that note, I'd like to say thank you. I have 4 different teams to thank: Maestro, PyMol, the PyDev, and the UX teams. There are 3 different offices. On the bottom left is New York, the top right's Portland, the bottom right's in Hyderabad. These have a few random more people because I had to find pictures. But generally speaking, all of these people are passionate about Qt and thankful for what it brings to Schrödinger. On that note, I'd also personally like to thank Qt because I've used the library so extensively over the years, and it's really been a pleasure to work on.